Hello and welcome to Fireside Chat number 55. This time we're going to be talking about the challenges of agreeing in teams. For those of you that are new, I'm Jose. I'm in the company of Mash and Sandro, both co-founders of Codurance. I'm managing director for Codurance Spain. And at some point we decided we used to have these chats all the time after work, and we decided at some point, hey, why don't we start recording, maybe streaming then some of the things that we talked about could be interesting for other people. And it turns out that yes. So if you like what you will see today, just like, subscribe, hit the notifications so you get uh, when we stream and propose topics, and join us in the chat as well, because a big part of what makes this great is the interaction, no, and the questions that a lot of people ask, which help enrich the conversation. So to jump into today's topic, uh, team agreements, right? Like we all, teams are one of those things that are essential to software development, and I would say any kind of enterprise, right? It's if you want to do something, normally you would need a bunch of people to collaborate, no, and to agree. But that's not always easy, right? Because one of the things that makes that collaboration effective is people agreeing on many things, no, agreeing on what goal they're trying to accomplish, agreeing on how they want to get there, and all of these things. And this is one of those things that they don't teach you at university when you're no, or they don't teach you in a boot camp or whatever, right? You kind of learn by doing, or by failing, I would say, no, to reach agreement. So yeah, we decided to dip our toes into it, share some of the experiences. Maybe we can start at the beginning. No, what type of team agreements or what kind of things we're talking about when we're saying, you know getting the team to agree or to perform, no, around those rules. Who wants to start?
Uh, I can start.
The definition,
No,
mash
I'm,
the
I'm not
definition
gonna.
guy.
I'm not gonna start with the definition this time, just to spite you, Jose.
Okay.
I'm gonna. I'm gonna start with saying that personally, it's astonishing how late I learned about this or its importance. Right. Up until quite late in my career, all the teams that I've been involved in, there were no real explicit team agreements. And now that I look back on those, so many dysfunctions could have been avoided if certain expectations and agreements were carefully set in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so my personal view is that they are an extremely important part for any team, and if you don't have explicit team agreements in your team, then you're in the same boat that I am, and at some point you're going to kick yourself that why have you never done that before.
Yeah, so the agreements are always there, right? So as you mentioned, Mesh, there are the explicit agreements, but even when you don't have them explicit, I'm sure that you have implicit, and but you might not have enough agreements, and that is where you create a lot of disputes, or people they become a bit
I
unhappy.
don't know if you have it implicit. It's more like you have some expectations that agreement
Yeah.
is in place, no, individually, but since it hasn't
Well,
been made
exactly,
explicit,
because that's what I mean. Because sometimes you like the problem with implicit agreements is it's not really an agreement; it's an expectation. And then on top of that, it's one of the things that causes problems because it can be quite different to the other person who thinks what the implicit agreement is, and often that's where the problems come. That's where the feeling of being unfairly treated or someone not playing the part of the team, all those feelings would arise from, right?
Yeah, no, I think you both have a point. Like, because like I think that you put it in a better way, because it's not that you have implicit agreements, you have expectations. I take the point. I think it's a very good point, but there are expectations. Let's put this way. So
Mhm.
if you don't have explicit agreements, you have at least expectations. The problem is that the expectations from the different people in the team might differ, and that's where the problems start. And there are different types of agreements as well, because there are agreements where there are part of the within a team. So imagine like a development team. So a development team is normally composed by people with different skill sets and different roles as well. Let's say a traditional team might have like a few developers. The developers themselves, they might vary in seniority levels and skills and knowledge of the business and so on. Even time in the company is a factor. Then you have other roles. You might have like a QA, you might have a business analyst, you might have a product owner, you might have a user experience, you might have like all those different types of roles that might compose a team. So there are agreements across the team, which already makes it difficult, even with people with the same kind of, like, for example, you have more than one developer or more than one business analyst. For example, even people with the same roles, let's say, already struggle sometimes to collaborate. That gets a bit even more complicated across different roles. And then there are agreements across teams, because different teams, they also need to have agreements with other teams that coexist in the same ecosystem. And there are agreements with the business themselves, right? So whoever the stakeholders might be, so that the team might also need to have some agreements. So those are just like very quickly what came to my mind when you think, okay, what are the kind of agreements? Where do we see problems? Let's say.
Yeah, no, I think a big part of the thing is not making those expectations explicit, right? Like a lot of people think that teams that work well are kind of like magic. No, there's some secret sauce, some, like the planets align and that's why they're so good or whatever. But a lot of it is, preparation and intention behind a bunch of things, right? The problem is, what are those things? And I feel that alignment, I would even say initial alignment, although you can do this at any point, during the lifetime of a team, right? Like, so if you haven't had that conversation about agreeing on stuff and how to work, maybe you can have it now, right? It's never too late. But it comes from that, not from not making those expectations clear, and then as the team has to deal with stuff both internally and externally, uh, things start to erode, right? Because those expectations are not being met, and then people don't feel, that they're being valued or whatever, right? And it comes eventually, things explode, and explode,
Yeah. I mean, we can maybe start talking about, we talked about different types, but we can start talking about actual agreements. Some of the more obvious ones that we think are always um, or implicit, and if other people don't adhere to them, you kind of get a bit peeved. And but how you kind of enforce them as well is something we can talk about later. But one, for example, agreement that's always bandied about a bit is, that there is, a lot of teams use daily stand-ups, and you should always be there for the daily stand-up, right? Or be there on time. They can be as, or I wouldn't call it trivial, but as simple as these, right? That you must attend the daily stand-up meeting and you must be there on time, right? But that's not always, some people can turn up a bit late, right? And then if you say to them, well, one thing is, don't come to meetings late, but what if they're 5 minutes late, or what if they're 10 minutes late, just a bit late? So what is a bit late and what is very late?
So
what
then, like, for example, let's try to, because there is an element here of not complying to agreements, right? But let's think about, before we talk about not complying to agreements, who should be defining those agreements? Because I think that one thing that I believe that hopefully people will agree that, like, we need some sort of agreements, right? A set of agreements that allows us to collaborate in a healthy way, let's say, right? So there is something that when someone is not complying, we can go back to and say, hey, look, we discussed this, that's the agreement that we made, and so on. So who should be defining? Is it like a democratic process where everyone has the same saying? Is it triggered by a specific person because of position? So how do you see that happening?
Oh, well, the manager, of course. Isn't that the manager's job? Sorry.
No,
Uh,
I actually think that one, yes, it needs to be democratic in the sense that everyone, for it to work, everyone needs to buy into it. Yeah, it like it's like everything. No, you can write down all the rules you want. People are not gonna follow them if they don't think that they need to follow them. Yeah, so that for me, that aspect needs to be there. Whether that happens because of fear, yeah, or it happens, with some other type of influence, no, just because people, believe in what they're saying. That's a different story, right? We can discuss
Let
the
me just
merits of that.
let me just pick on one of the words that you used, Jose. Like, I just want to clarify what you meant, basically, because you mentioned that it should be democratic. But like, um, my definition of that is that everyone has equal voting power. If we are using the word democratic, another
Mhm.
thing is different in saying like everyone should have a saying, but that doesn't mean that everyone has the each person has the same weight in the decision that is made, because those are for me very different.
I personally think that it should not be, it's not a vote thing. It should be a complete agreement.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
that
it's not
that's what
like,
I that's what I think as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So one thing is the details. Yeah. But even that, the underlying assumption is that even if someone has the responsibility or the knowledge to say what the details are going to look like, yeah, people still agree with the general idea of what goes in there, right? So let's say, like, if you I don't know, if you're defining that we're gonna have definition of done or definition of ready, and then what needs to be in there. Maybe I've never done that. Maybe I don't know what needs to go in there. Maybe I'm being too whatever, right? But I do agree with the idea that we need some sort of definition of done or definition of ready, and that I'm okay with committing to that kind of behavior. No, whatever we agree, I'm going to support. Yeah, I'm going to do so that aspect. And if I don't support it, yeah, I feel that it's a healthy team's response. Yeah, for people to say, yeah, I don't support this because of this, this, and this, and then you resolve whatever disagreement is in place, either by removing the thing altogether because we can't agree, yeah, or by getting into a place where people can agree and support it. Yeah, but if you just you know brush it under the rug, you're still gonna have the disagreement. You went through the motions of the exercise of writing things down and all this stuff, but you didn't get the important part, which is people to commit to changing, to follow those behaviors. And I think that's more important. People committing to doing the behavior is more important than what you have in there, because that already gives it power. No, it's a tool that is for the team,
Mm-hmm.
right?
But there is a thing that I think Mesh mentioned a while back, as we were discussing a similar topic, and he mentioned like about principles and values, right? So I was just thinking about, for example, not always we will agree. So, for example, you mentioned, Jose, like that people need. It's important that people participate and try to reach a consensus. But there will be things that people might diverge. Yeah. And they say, look, I don't think we should do, I don't know, just making stuff up. Yeah. Test driven development or pairing or demos every 2 weeks or whatever that might be. Yeah. So one person might say, look, I don't think we should do that because it's a waste of time or whatever that person might think. Yeah. So how a team would deal when it seems that some people cannot reach an agreement. So and I'm trying to make a reference to principles. Is there like a set of principles and values, for example? Is it worth defining something at a higher level that serves as a guidance?
Yeah. So one of the first things that they teach you, I did the ORSC training, is organizational relationship coach, systemic coaching. Yeah, And one of the first things that they teach you is coaching for, groups, teams, systems in general, anything that involves people, right? One of the first things that they tell you about is you need to create that agreement within, what are the rules for the system, because that is what allows you to work everything else, right? Like, it gives you kind of like an anchor point, so that when things go wrong, yeah, you can always go back to that and say, hey, you remember, is this what we said that we wanted to do in the beginning, etc., etc., and then you kind of bring back the to its center. No, you kind of give it some stability back again, right? And it's the same, it's not only for the team, it's also the relationship with the coach or with whoever is, interacting with that system. And I feel like that is essential, right? Like, and the thing is, we could, as long as we are aligned in the values, knowing how we want that relationship to be as a team or whatever, right? The details we can always talk about, right? We can always find some sort of strategy to, like, you said an example. No, like, I don't want to do TDD because I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. Okay. And people can say, okay, so you don't have to do TDD, we're going to help you, yeah, we're going to train you, etc., etc., and until you get there, right, we will be supporting you or whatever. But you don't have to feel like you, as long, for us, it's good enough that you understand that quality is important and that you want to improve your skill set to get there, and we will support that. So that is a strategy, no, that will be very valid, right?
In
But you can only get there if that person actually agrees
in
in
fact,
in the foundation, no.
in fact, if you look at XP talks about setting this framework in place right at the very start and evolving it as you go along. So that's why, if you look at, for example, I remember XP explained by Kent Beck, and even in there, they talk about these are the base set of values, and then there are some principles and practices, right? Values are what you all have to agree on, and you can choose values, you can add more and remove them, whichever whatever set is important to you. Those values inform principles, and those principles inform practices. So for example, if you look at one of the XP values is feedback, right? Now incremental change is one of his principles that actually supports the value of feedback. TDD is part, could be described as part of the kind
The
of the incremental
practice,
change. Pardon?
the practice that complies to the principle and then the value.
Yeah, exactly. So the way he actually described it is that principles almost bridge the gap between values and practices. So that principles are a bit more closer aligned to the, so they can help you understand, kind of work your way back to the value basically.
So just for me to so map again. So the value here was feedback.
Yeah.
The practice was TDD, and what was the principle?
The principle in the middle. So one of the principle in the middle is incremental change.
Right.
Right. Or fast feedback is another. So feedback is a value, but fast feedback is a principle. So they kind of, as soon as you can see principles, then you can reason about the practices quite easily with principles. But what he talks about, I mean, these are just the basis of your team agreements. These are, and that's why he basically, that's why he wrote all about this, is that, I'm giving you a base. This is what you evolve from. It's not the thing, if you don't have something, take these and then evolve from it. Because someone mentioned, I think it was Emmanuel. So for me, really, that should evolve in the team, since each team has different situations and we should adopt. Yes, but you need to have something to start with. So if you don't have anything, like doing this huge kind of brain storming session and so on what values and so on, it's people have done a lot of thinking around how teams should work well, and there are a good base set of values and principles that you can then evolve from. You don't have to start from scratch.
Yeah, the Mark Gray also mentioned on LinkedIn, saying that there is the disagree and commit way. Which, so I've been thinking a lot about the disagree and commit, Mark, and I also use that internally. But there is the disagree and commit is a bit more complicated. For example, in order for me, or I'll talk for me, right? Because it's easier for me to think about how I would react. In my day-to-day job, like I need to disagree and commit often, right? it's easier to disagree and commit when I'm disagreeing with the practice, but not the principle and value. So, for example, if I'm in agreement with the value and the principle, it's easier for me to disagree and commit to a practice, because I know that maybe a slightly different practice that is still aligned to that principle and value. It's easier for me to disagree. So look, you know what? If I was doing that, I would do that in a different way. However, this is, I recognize as a valid way. It's just not my preferred one, for X, Y, and Z reasons. But I still can see that we are moving the right direction. So that disagree and commit is easier if it's at the practice level, but very difficult if it's at the value or even principle level.
Yeah, I think that's a very good distinction, right? It's, to me, disagree and commit is actually where a good debate has failed to reach conclusion, right?
Mhm.
So what you're saying is, let's cut off the debate here. It's
We
probably
need
not
to do
worth.
something.
We need to do
Most likely, we
something.
just need to make a decision. So let's make
Yeah,
this
let's try
decision,
this.
and let's try it out.
Yeah,
And
it's
yeah,
so approach practice that level is, I totally agree. That's where you would have that.
there is another usage of the disagree and commit thing, which is uh, kind of like not taking ownership for things, right? There's two. I mean, it can also be seen as a dysfunction, because I can use that as a shield for not taking ownership. Yeah. So if you're really, I disagree, but I don't do the commit part, the commit part. However, I am saying that I disagree and commit, right? Like, so this is the kind of dysfunction there, right? Like, I'm
Yeah,
saying
always kind of holding
it,
the "I told you so" afterwards. That
Right.
it's like, no, I tell you, see, this is gonna fail, whatever, right? Or not even doing, what you're supposed to be doing, no, and just expecting, I'm not gonna move a finger to do this, right? And I think that that's a problem, right? Like, I would much rather you to tell me that you're not gonna do it, so that I can deal with that situation, yeah,
Mhm.
um, and that's it, than to erode the relationship further by not doing the thing, and then having to come back
But
to
I
this and
think
say,
that's basically, you're not really applying the disagree and commit kind of
No.
practice,
but
right? You're not doing the
okay,
commit.
but it's often
Then
it
what you're doing
happens
is,
often, yeah.
well, disagree and sulk. That's
Yeah,
what
yeah,
you're doing.
disagree and so, yeah, no, that's true. And then the other thing is, again, they're not taking ownership aspect, right? Like, the okay, so this was not my decision, this is your decision, right?
Yeah,
I
totally.
told you that I didn't want to do that, this was not the right thing, but you
Yeah.
still made the decision, and we move forward with that,
Mhm.
which is also kind of uh,
Yeah. You know,
a similar attitude, no?
another thing about values and principles is that that allows you to not have fine-grained um, agreements, right? Because if you have, so for example, let's take, oh, you must come to the stand up on time, yeah, that thing. Now, if you were going that granular level in it being explicit about your agreements, then there are so many agreements that you have to put in place, right? But even that, so for example, if I look at the value of respect, yeah, you would you could describe it from that point of view, that if someone is coming in late and other people are having to wait into meeting, they don't prescribe, they're not respecting their teammates, right? So you can always go back to that value and say, well, is this person living that value, or
Did,
not? and
did
and that actually helps you in a way not to have too many fine grain agreements, but rather a bit more kind of conceptual agreements.
to your point before around, would it be best to kind of agree at a higher level, and then use that and so on? This is precisely it. And it's not so much what you end up writing, it's the shared understanding and the conversations that you have around that. Because when
Mhm.
you put something like respect, transparency, collaboration, empathy, and so on, yeah,
No one would
people,
disagree with that.
no one, yeah, because everyone is giving those words their own meaning,
Yeah.
right? Those are just labels that people attach meaning to, right?
Yeah.
Now, when you start looking at it, no, and say, oh, but respect, what does respect mean for you? Like, how would I know? This is a question that, like, how would I know, yeah, that we have respect in the team, or that
or,
I'm being
or
respected,
you
or
have
that
like
I,
conflicting, or you have conflicting things, like for example, oh, I was late for the meeting, so you feel that I disrespected you because I was late and you waste your time, but you didn't respect me because I have something else, and like there is
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
that side
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
that kind of conversation around alignment of what the words mean, yeah,
Mhm.
is very valuable. And this is
Mhm.
also why you need to constantly be reviewing this stuff, right? Like when you the fact that people agree on it, yeah, and then you can go back to it and, okay, so maybe we need to change this, maybe we need to define a bit better what we meant by, because we saw this situation that did not completely fit to what, so and now we get a better understanding and so on. And it also serves as a point where, if someone else, before you were talking about how much time people have been in the company or in the team and so on, right? So if someone else comes in, then you already have a set of things that you need to discuss with them, right?
Mhm.
And make sure that they're on board, and like have trigger again that conversation, no, so that you have that stability, that that center point. Otherwise,
Even
good.
to the point where values and principles should be part of your vocabulary when you are having discussions, right? Whether it's a design discussion, it's a technical discussion, or it's a team work type discussion, that it's actually important to take those, whatever you're deciding, the decisions or those conversations, back to certain values and principles, because that helps strengthen. Because if you don't discuss these things, if they're not part of your vocabulary, if they're not creating the framework for your discussions, they are then just something you've written down on a Confluence page or on a wall somewhere. So it's not just about having those, explicitly having those discussions just about values, or like, let's talk about values or principles, but should be about, okay, we are we are gonna do this, we are gonna do this thing this way, because we value fast feedback, or we value feedback, and because of that we're gonna, so you start kind of bringing this as part of your vocabulary to kind of help strengthen that within the team culture as well, I think.
Yeah, so there is a question from Emmanuel. So the question is like, so when would you define the agreements that are the values and principles? Before the team has been created, or would it be the first thing when you create the team? So I
Uh,
think that if you are starting from scratch, that's a good point. Like, so as you are creating this team, like the one of the first things that the team should do is to create those agreements. But the team will, those agreements are not written in stone. And the team configuration will change. Some people will leave that team, others will join that team. And the context of that team will change as well. A team that is new will evolve. Like they are new to a brand new context, and they will learn over time as well. I think that you should do it sooner rather than later. So as soon as possible, basically. And when you are onboarding a new team member, it would be good to present those things to that team member. And when even like existing members of the team, they want to change the ways that the team is working, they want to introduce a new practice, or even like discard an existing practice or change or whatever. Um, when they propose that, they first of all they should say, like, is it aligned? For example, when people say like the TDD is always a very some practices are very controversial, right? So TDD or pair programming and things like that. So let's say if people say, I don't want to do TDD anymore. So then the natural question after that is, fine, awesome. So what do you want to do instead? Because we still want to have some code, some feedback. So you should have a set of principles that could guide you. Say, look, okay, if you don't want to do that, great. But like, what is your proposal? So if you're not going to get that fast feedback from our code, and this might create a problem later down the line that the code will need to be tested in a different way. So what would be your alternative for us not to have rework or to have a faster feedback that is given by TDD? So then all of a sudden, you are not rejecting someone's idea. You are just asking for an alternative. And that is normally a healthier debate, right? TDD might be a bit difficult, for example, to come up with an alternative. The alternatives are not that great when we compare certain benefits, let's say, that TDD gives you. But for example, not doing test at all is a problem. But if you say someone wants to say, I want to do test afterwards, that's an interesting discussion to have, because most of the principles will still be satisfied. It doesn't matter if you wrote before or after the code, as long as that those when the person says, like, when I'm done, when I say, look, I'm done with my tasks, I have my unit tests running and they run fast and so on. Is it really a big deal if they did afterwards or not? So, for example, I would do first because I feel better doing this way. But let's say if we are all working in isolation and the end result satisfy our principles and values, and by the way, I don't want to be, I'm not advocating for that because that's not what I would do, right? But this is an interesting conversation to have, because sometimes you say, like, oh, do unit test or not? That's a very clear distinction. But when we are so closer, how do we deal with that?
We had consultants. We had consultants in the chat.
Yeah.
Someone saying, well, I would say that it depends. No, on the context.
Depends on the context. I would take it to one level even further, right? How do you, like, let's say someone test drove their code, but the tests were rubbish and the code is rubbish, and someone wrote no tests and wrote a very nice, simple, elegant piece of code that's very easy to read and in other ways more maintainable. Of course, it doesn't have tests, so it's less maintainable in that regard.
I would split the discussion. I would separate the quality of what's being produced,
the maintainability, no, and whether we can verify that it still works the way that we want it to work.
So the way that I would deal with that, because then you could still acknowledge the quality of what's produced, and you can tackle a deficiency, not of the code itself, but what it will create for the team or to the process of releasing that software later on. And then you can say, look, okay, so the code looks nice. Yeah, it's well designed and stuff and works well and stuff. Great. So that you get a green tick, you get a sticker. Yeah. So good job in there. So you don't discuss that. You discuss what is missing.
Yeah, so, I agree. I agree that 2 hour almost, I'm doing that classic thing, that argument, but it's
the fake dichotomy,
the fake economy, like, oh, why are you talking about climate change when people are dying?
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
To the question before, sorry,
no, go on.
To the question before of when it's a good time to do this, right? You did some mention of, well, you didn't explicitly mention it, but you were kind of talking about Tucker's model on, storming, norming, forming, storming, norming, blah, blah, right? And that's one way that people look at that. So every time that you bring someone into the team, you're going back into the forming, storming kind of, and then you need norms again, right? There is another theory that's called the punctuated equilibrium, I think it's called, which basically talks about when are groups or teams more receptive to that learning or to changing their behavior, and it's usually at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end. Yeah. So basically, pick one of those, and by the way, it's in an interval, right? Like for the task that they're doing. So if you're doing it in a project, let's say, right, like beginning of the project, middle of the project, end of the project, yeah. But there's nothing saying that if you have sprints or you have whatever, like releases or whatever, you can't do it for those as well, right? So kind of it applies at different levels.
Magnitude of the
exactly. It applies at different levels, right? So you could just choose, one of those points, yeah, and bring the conversation in, right? Whether you are launching the team because the task is about to start or whatever, or you're already in the middle of the task, or you're at the end of the task and you just want to do that learning, right? So that's also a valid approach
So,
to that.
so let's go. Sorry, go on, Sandro.
No. So I'll tell you what I wanted to say, and then you tell me, and then we decide where we go.
Okay.
Right. What I was saying is like TDD is normally a very easy. We discussed that a billion times, but there are other things that are far more challenging. Right. Is design or architectural agreements. So this is normally quite often I see developers and team leads and architects having a big issue about that. Estimation, right? So an estimation is an agreement normally between the team and the business, right? So demos. So there is certain things that a team does to their stakeholders, and estimation is one of them, right? So then there is a lot of to discuss in there, and as I said, like quite often people decide architectures or normally those decisions they go across teams and stuff like that, but developers also want to have their freedom to do their thing locally and stuff. So those things are also quite complicated, and the disagree and commit or having just principles are not enough in those cases. So, I mean, you cannot just go back to principles and say, well, not always, at least, to say, look, okay, I will let some principles guide my design decision because, like, you agreed on using a specific reference architecture or framework or ways of doing certain things. You cannot just.
So you can actually, because what you just said, I think is, we can probably have a series of fireside chats on these
All right,
different
okay.
kinds of agreement, right? But let's take the architectural one. In fact, we did this at one of our clients. Actually, it was me and someone else, Sandro. I think you weren't there. But there are some things, of course, not everything can be codified as principles. But we were having this exact problem, is that there are many teams and there are certain principles that we want them to follow, architectural principles, right? So we, for example, had things like a module will have a very well defined interface, and another module cannot have dependency on that module without going through the interface, because they were all sharing the same code base, and we had lots of different. So we were describing at a fairly low, you can go even higher level to something, but in fact, as those teams, we came up with about 12 or 13 basic principles, because there was so much wrong there that we didn't want to make it even worse, right? So we actually started talking about certain architectural mistakes that people are making and enshrining them as principles, as agreements, that they would not do that again. So that you couldn't make more of those problems, but you could refactor away from them. So there are some things, I think, even at the design level, I mean, some things you can't, but some things you can actually describe and agree as base level principles, even at the architectural and design level, I think.
And again, the conversations are important. Things like
Yeah.
the architectural decision records and requests for comments and that kind of stuff. What they're looking for, right, is to create that consensus around what the approach should be, and bring all the perspectives together, and then make a decision, kind of, right?
Yeah, the decision records are an agreement, basically, that an agreement has been made, and this is
the decision that we made.
Very good point.
There you go. It's written down. We can then later on change it or whatever, right? But
this is the agreement currently.
Exactly. And you can have the conversations around that, right? So it also happens at that level.
Sorry, guys, I got a little bit distracted because, like, I was trying to share the link that Jose put on the channel with the LinkedIn people as well. That's why you probably saw flickering on our screen the link and stuff. Because, like, just for people to know, like that we have people live on YouTube and LinkedIn at the same time, so we can see both. But if you are on YouTube, you cannot see LinkedIn. If you are LinkedIn, you cannot see YouTube. So you're just trying to share the links on both platforms.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's because
so
someone asked what was, if I could send a reference to what I mentioned before, the punctuated equilibrium model for team development, Garrick's model, I think it's called. So
yeah,
yeah,
on both channels as well. So people on both
yeah.
sides asked for that reference. So Mesh, I missed. So I got distracted. So in this case, like I missed part of what you said, but like what was that? For example, someone needs to make. Let's take the architectural example. Yeah. So someone needs to make those decisions, mainly architectural decisions that go. There are architectural slash design decisions that only impact a single team, or let's say a single area, or an area of the system where a single team operates. And there are certain architectural design decisions that will affect uh, across multiple areas of that system where multiple teams will be impacted. So in both cases, so who makes those decisions, those agreements, let's say, and how team members can deal with that when they feel they don't disagree? And also, should it be a democracy, everyone has an equal voting or equal say on those decisions?
No,
That's a
it should
different
always be the
story.
manager.
Is this our new "it depends" answer?
No, I think we're moving away a little bit into getting everyone aligned on the same direction and that kind of stuff, right? Like there is a subtlety there, right? Like this is no longer. It's about maintaining coherence as well.
No, there is
Right?
alignment, but this alignment needs to result in an agreement, right?
There is agreement. I think what you're trying, Sandro, what you're trying to, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're trying to draw the distinction between agreements that are within a team and agreements that are across teams.
And both bring challenges because, like, for example, within a team, you need to have certain design decisions, and mainly for developers, for example, this is a thing that we love to disagree in how to design or architect something. Yeah. And that gets even worse when you try to do that across teams, because then you cannot have certainly every single developer of every single team involved in those much larger architectural decisions. So basically, the question here is like, who makes those agreements, and what happens when you disagree? And this is the point that I'm trying to make.
So, do you want the ideal world answer or the
I want, I want the
reality?
yeah the utopian.
In a utopian thing, you at least agree on how the decision is going to be made. Yeah. So,
Right.
so if you agree, that there's an architect and that architect is accountable and responsible for making the decision, they can consult, they can do whatever. But you agree that that's a system in which you're working, and you will do what comes out of that system. That's the
In the scenario that I was actually presenting, the way that we did it was that there were representation from each team who were selected from the team, and the team had confidence in those
the best
people.
debate, the best debate.
The
No,
debating champion,
exactly the
the
debate.
master debaters, but but and then of course we were there as hired master, I mean consultants, to kind of help facilitate, but also
Facilitate
provide
the
the,
thing.
yeah, I was going to say mercenaries, but consultants, to help facilitate the argument, and also to provide some knowledge that may not exist, because these teams had been there, and in a lot of the times they've all been there for a very long time, and then there did need to be some external kind of knowledge and thinking to come in. The whole idea of coming up with these agreements came from us externally, but also we kind of help them understand the things that are important, the things that are happening, that are causing the problems. They also had a very good ideas on other aspects. We brought those things together. We said, okay, how can we uh, create a few, not too many, because as soon as you have like a very long list, and no one does it. So let's create a few that will make the problem better, and we evolve as we go along. But yes, they were. This was a collaborative way of agreeing. It wasn't a democratic way in the sense that there was no voting. It was basically like, we are going to start to first brainstorm, and these are the things that we should be that are causing us problems. Out of that, let's extract whatever it is. Out of those, let's now talk about, are there any concerns and disagreements, and then addressing those concerns and disagreements to the point where no one has a concern, or it's not strong enough for them to voice it. And so there was no kind of voting, there was no democratic aspect, it was
Or
collaborative.
we hit them and hit them enough times with the hammer so that they don't
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
like they
yeah.
want to speak
The
anymore.
beating continued until morale improved across
Exactly.
Yeah, the reason I brought this topic is because this is probably one of the most difficult one that I see, mainly for organizations that have like tens, if not hundreds, of developers, right? So I always have like, to be fair, I don't have like a perfect solution for that, because we are still dealing with people with emotions and so on and so forth. And it's difficult also. For example, one thing I already said in previous Fireside Chat, I don't think that those kind of very high level strategic decisions should be made democratically. That what I mean by that is every person, regardless of their seniority level, experience in the company, or experience with the technology, or so on, has an equal vote. I'm against that. I don't think that that is a smart way to define the strategy for a company. Yeah. So there is a reason that people specialize or evolve. There are different seniority levels, different expertise and stuff, and that needs to play a part in how decisions are made. You cannot run a company as if it was a government. Yeah. So that is one side. But I like the collaborative approach. But the collaborative approach where everyone is consulted, or so this is, I believe that, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding here is that when we talk about collaborative, it means people are consulted, they are heard, they are asked their opinions, but that doesn't mean that every opinion will count the same way, because if we think about that, it will be impossible to make any decision anywhere, or it will take forever, right? So this is where we need to, I think you referred to it, Mesh, and correct me if I misunderstood what you said, but like, first of all, we need to agree or sometimes accept how decisions are made. Mm-hmm. Right? Because again, you cannot just what I'm putting for some. Let's say I join an organization. Let's say I'm looking for a job. I join an organization as a junior, and all of a sudden I say, look, you know what? I don't agree with how decision is made in this company that is like 2,000 people company that has been around for 20 years. It doesn't work like that. So I might try to understand. So which means in this case, I can ask questions. I can try to understand how decisions are made, but I also need to understand that decisions are made in a certain way. And I need to understand what is my area of influence. And I think that a good way to, when you are in that position that is quite a weak position, for example, you don't join an organization as a junior and then all of a sudden tell the organization how they should change. Right? So first of all, you need to know your place, that you don't have all that experience. So my first approach was always like, okay, start asking questions. Ask questions why things are done in certain ways. So instead of fighting for the practices, I think that goes back to what we were saying before. Don't fight. If you disagree with a practice, don't fight at that level first. Don't start fighting there. Try to understand, why do we have that practice? What is the problem that you're trying to achieve with that ways of working or with that design decision? And then once you understand what you're trying to achieve, you might be in a better place to start proposing different approach as long as they try to satisfy the same problems, right? So that's trying to bind.
You just there's a couple of things there. Like, by the way, I understand the sentiment of what you're saying, but and I agree with the sentiment, but there are certain things that you said that are kind of like, okay, uh, I wouldn't put it like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you're someone that comes in new, of course you need to understand what context you're joining and all of that if you really want to make good suggestions. That let's put it like this, right? If you want to suggest that things should change, yeah, you need to understand what's there in order to propose things that make sense, right? Like, otherwise you're just giving advice that nobody, you don't even understand what's happening, right? So I can get on board with that for sure. But one of the things, like, you're coming in as a junior, whatever, I see value in people's opinion independently of how much experience, because they come, there are things that people outside of the system can see when they join, usually for a short period of time, because then they get assimilated, no, and that's a different perspective, and you can take care of you can take advantage of that, right? So that aspect, I think it's important, whether the organization enables that, even if the people don't have the experience or the self-awareness, yeah, to say, maybe I don't know everything I need to know before yeah, that's a different story. And it brought to mind an example from a friend of mine. I think he's in Ocala right now, and they have a system for planning logistics and routes for deliveries and that kind of stuff. So a lot of traveling salesman problem, right, and that kind of thing, right? And as part of the induction process, they ask people to come up with a better algorithm, right? So they basically say, listen, you're going to be working on this, but before we go in and tell you how it's done, and then you go playing about this is going to be this way or whatever, right? Take this time, yeah. I maybe I don't know the details exactly how they organize this, but I think I'm not lying on this, yeah. Take your time and try to come up with a better algorithm than what we're spitting out, yeah. And then people try out their ideas, and they this and that, and they convince themselves that whatever it is that they're doing, it comes from a lot of experience and trial and error, and like overall a lot of accumulated knowledge, yeah, and improvements that have been made to the system, yeah. And that if things work that way, it's because there is a reason for that to happen. And that's, I think, a very good way of taking advantage of both things, right?
No,
Because
sure, but
you
that
may
is a
come up
very
with something that we didn't think of, no,
sure,
and that
sure.
can
But that is
be
just like one, for example, this is a very specific example, but like when you join a new organization, you have a whole bunch of stuff that works so there are multiple aspects of the business, or the code base, or the process, or decision making, or the architecture, or everything that works in that way. You cannot do that example that you mentioned for every single thing that happens within an organization at all levels of the organization. And for example, we have Kevin. Kevin was saying, I understand Sandro's opinion, but you need to take care about not taking the voice of the new people. So the thing that I was trying to say here, Kevin, is not that we are ignoring the opinion of new people. And maybe it's difficult for me to see how I came across, but given José's reaction, it probably not well, and Kevin. So what I was trying to say is that when you want to challenge the status quo, there are ways of doing that. Because, for example, there are ways that are healthy for the person questioning the status quo and for the organization as a whole. Because, for example, you need some sort of stability. You cannot, for every single new person that joins the organization, try to review everything that the organization does that this person might not agree. From a few small designs at the code until how the CEO of the company or the company strategy is done. See what I'm saying? So where is the boundary? So you cannot just go there and I'm a new guy, I want to question everything that this 100 years old, 5,000 people company has been doing because I think that should not be done this way. So Of course, I'm giving an extreme example to prove a point. So
And you're
there are
also
two
talking
sides
about
to it.
scaling what the example that I gave, which was not the point behind it. Yeah, it was just an example of how they turned something that they obviously have problems with, because everyone who came in, they all
Mhm.
wanted to change the thing, right? Like because you always think, hey, we could do this, we could do that, or whatever, right? So that was their way of dealing with that particular context, right? I'm not saying that that is what everyone should do to be able to do that. It's just one
Yeah.
example, no, that I felt
No, no, no,
takes
I
care
get
of
it.
both things, right? Like one is you need to understand well enough, yeah, and also you may have some good ideas that we can
Mhm.
work with. So there you go.
But
Like it's
no,
kind of
I get it. But
like
that
both
would
ways.
not scale. This is what I was saying. So then
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
was trying to
exactly.
say here is that there are ways that are healthier for the individual and for the organization in how you do that. The first one is, first of all, when you join, try to ask questions. If there are things, first of all, wait a little bit to start challenging. So understand your environment. Be there for at least a couple of weeks, a month. Start speaking to people. So like, I want to learn. I'm a new person. Why do we do those kind of things? So I want to collaborate with everyone. And then when there are things that you feel that could be done in a different way, before questioning how it's done, I would question, what are we trying to achieve, so that we can elevate, instead of discussing the practice, instead of discussing TDD or that design or that decision making process. We're still like, what are we trying to achieve when we, so what is the goal here when we are using those practices or the decision making? So try to bring that conversation before even I raise my opinion, the discussion, so that I understand those principles and values that you were talking about.
I think what we are trying to say is effectively we're talking about questioning, and what we mean by that is a disagreement, right? So you come in new to the place, and there are certain things that are being done you disagree with, and you're voicing your disagreements, right? I think, Sandro, what you're trying to say as well probably is that it is not wrong to voice your disagreements. In fact, you must. The thing is that your disagreements must be well reasoned and well thought out, right? Now this goes for everybody, whether you are new or old, or how long you've been away. That you, every time, I think you can boil this conversation down to this: every time you disagree or you feel like disagreeing with something, ask yourself, is my disagreement well reasoned? And when I make this disagreement, am I making an opinion heard, or do I have a well reasoned argument behind it that I'm going to articulate and help them understand? So that when I actually raise my disagreement, I say, I think that this is not the right way for these particular reasons, and these may be the alternatives, and that's why they are better because of these. And there's some sort of an analysis and reasoning behind the proposal or the disagreement that you are making. But personally, I don't think whether you are new, junior, senior, whatever, these things
No,
stands.
that's
It's
fair.
actually could be one of the basic principles that we were
No,
talking about as part of your team
no,
meeting.
that's fair. So it's just like, for example, what I see is that there are sometimes there is a lot of heated arguments, and every person that comes in, they try to change things. So there is also an element of understanding the kind of, I think that we should always challenge. Like I spent, like we didn't get to where we are just being complacent or not asking questions or not challenging the status quo, right? So normally people that end up over time acquiring more responsibilities or playing positions where they have more decision making power, they are people that are questioning and challenging and asking for more responsibility, because that's what you end up doing as you go through those process of challenging the status quo, right? So when we really make a change, not only challenging the status quo, but actually pulling responsibility to yourself and say, look, okay, I want to drive that change. So I don't want just to be someone that is annoying, that just complaining, or see what I mean? Like you want to fix something, and that automatically you bring responsibility to yourself. Yeah. So, but there is an element of like at some point, not everyone will agree. And there is a need to put a stop on that position. That's the last resort. Like we try to do as collaborative as possible, as we discussed multiple times. But at some point, we need to understand what kind of accountability that different people have. Because I can advise, for example, when we work with our clients, or there is someone a few levels above me, I say, look, I can advise, but I cannot make the decision. For example, I will not be directly accountable for certain things. So at some point, we also need to understand where our zone of influence ends. Yeah. So things that I'm accountable for, I'm gonna fight hard. But I understand that there are things that are much bigger than me that I can try to influence and advise and hopefully provide a better alternative. But that's still not my accountability, someone else's accountability, and someone who need to put an end to that discussion if we cannot reach an agreement.
You know, this part about accountability is quite important as well, because if we part of the agreement is being able to hold people accountable for it. Yeah, each other, right? Like it's, if you're in the team, like it's a team that holds each other accountable. No, the team members. But when you're doing something like that, sometimes it's even it's even more important, again, that agreement, and that so the people get that accountability themselves, than just making the decision and just expecting. And because then you go from individual accountability and responsibility into enforcing, right? Which is kind of like an external thing to the no, you then go into someone needs to be policing that these things are happening. We need to put systems in place, like, you know, code coverage checks, and, you know, quality gateways, and like make sure that this layer doesn't talk to this other layer or whatever, right? Like all of that instrumentation. By the way, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it's okay if it's really serving a purpose, yeah, and not because you're lacking something somewhere else, and you're trying to kind of get by, no, or trying to solve it without addressing the root cause for it,
Mhm.
right? Because people will find a way, right?
Yeah.
Like they'll find a way to increment whatever,
That
right? Like the build times or whatever you put in place. So.
we are running out of time, but there is one thing there's actually a lot of things that can be discussed under here. But there is one thing is, how does the team enforce certain agreements when someone is, you know, out of whack, basically? Someone is not adhering to certain principle,
You
values,
lock
so
them in
on
a
and so.
room. You lock them in a room, and you throw in the whip.
Well, I think one thing I want to say, and in fact, this is one something that, you know, when our cross people in training program used to, and I would give them a bit of a spiel in the beginning, I would always say this to them is that if someone is late to your meetings, it's your responsibility to tell them that they're late, right? And don't tell them, you know, you can set them aside and say, like, listen, this is our agreement. Here's our agreement. We respect each other. We come to our meeting, and you are not. If maybe you have certain problems, and let's, you know, let us know. We can change the time, or raise it explicitly within the team, so that we can all address it together. But don't just turn up too late and pretend that it hasn't happened. Now, this kind of thing doesn't, like, that's just an example, right? But this kind of thing often doesn't happen, and we kind of carry resentment, especially the Brits that we are, carry resentment in our hearts. And I think, you know, that person, about this is an agreement, you know, like, should you know, or we, you know, even more implicit agreements. But I think there is an important thing that needs to be said here, if you don't talk about this topic in the next few fireside chats, is that it is the job of the team to enforce and protect the agreements that it has. Because if a violation of that agreement goes unanswered, that agreement is no longer an agreement. And it is as bad as that. And I think this is something very important for people to go away with.
Yeah, this is the problem, because like I know that we are already like 4 minutes past the hour, and I would love to continue this as well. But this enforcement is also difficult for the team to do, because sometimes, let's say you have a team of 7 or 8, and there is one member of the team that for some reason they don't respect some of the agreements, not all, but some of the agreements. Some other team members might not feel comfortable to create and not all the team members might feel the same way. This is another problem that you have, because some people in the team might be okay with whatever that other person is doing, others might not. And then there is that so how do they deal with that? They might not feel empowered, and some of those things that they might be so complicated that they, for example, they say, look, it's not my job to go and tell someone off. So
But
This is
here
this
is
is a
but
great,
here
great episode. This could be a very good episode.
but this is where leadership comes into play as well. Yeah, and by leadership I don't mean only authority. Yeah, although people in authority do hold power, and therefore there's some leadership involved in that. Yeah. Um, we can do a whole spiel on, on leadership, right? But this is where leaders come into place, because part of the there's a couple of things that you want to create. Yeah, you want to create an environment where people can hold each other accountable. So that's part of setting those expectations from the beginning. Hey, by the way, if this is not coming, anyone can say, hey, you know, Elmo, let's move on, whatever. Like, you give the tools, right? And you use them. Yeah. And you use them as well. Like, the part of this is, you need to set an example that this is okay. For instance, if you are doing things wrong and someone calls you out on that, you don't step on them. Right? That's the basic example of no, because you are setting the example. Your reaction there should be, oh shit, you're right, I didn't realize, or there's this thing, whatever. You deal with it the way that you would expect someone else to be able to deal with it. Yeah, as part of the team. So by making yourself vulnerable as well, no, and by showing that you respect the agreements independently of whatever status you have or whatever, that is already reinforcing that idea. Yeah. Then there is the encouragement to other people to do it, right? One example is there's a very common systemic pattern, which is shifting the burden, where people, they're kind of like not dealing with the problem. And one example of that is, someone is not doing the tests or whatever, right? Instead of telling them directly and addressing, getting to the root of the thing, no, I will come to my team lead, or I will come to my manager, and I'll complain about this person doing the test, with the intention that, I just did my part, right? I raised my hand, I said, hey, everything is good, now you go and solve the problem for me, right? And completely remove your agency in this matter, which is a big problem as well. So as a leader, when people come to you and say, hey, solve this problem for me, you need to be aware whether that is happening or not. And you need to, I'm not saying it's always the case, but one example would be, hey, did you already talk to him about this? What did you tell him? What did he say? What is the issue? What was the resolution? Did you try to resolve the problem on your own before? Yeah. And then if there's enough base for me to step in or whatever, then maybe you can step in and have the conversation, or help in some way, right? But this is a very common pattern as well, that people don't, because it's uncomfortable. Yeah, like you really need some you need to make it a very safe, no, for people to feel like they have that power to do those things, no, to call each other out when things are not working, and that's not going to damage the relationship. It's also very cultural, we talked about this in other example episodes, no, people are more open or more whatever, right? Like, that's very cultural as well. But you need to be aware of all those things. As a leader, it is your job to create that space where people can have the space to agree,
it's funny because, like, I don't know, sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name. I normally say Laura, or Laura, as you say in English, but like Laura was saying that it's not easy. What is it like? It's not easy when people not adhering to the agreed ways of working or being late are the one in management. So this probably will open up a brand new kind of
No, but
thing.
it's one
The kind of
example
worms.
of emulating
Yeah,
with example, no, and what
yeah,
you can do to reinforce or destroy, yeah, the that agreement or that thing as a
yeah.
leader, right?
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I think that yeah, I think that many people like online now are saying to us like to be nice if you could like have
Finish on time, yeah. Like it would be
It'd be
okay.
nice.
Finish
Like I'm
on
still
time.
gonna go to
the,
my dinner.
quite a
It's
few
like
people probably
get be
yeah. So
done with
so
it.
I think that they all recognize that this is a topic that can be easily extended into multiple directions, but probably we should
We should
cut this
finish.
one and maybe get different aspects of this one. Laura, the one that you raised is an interesting one when we sometimes look up and the problem is above, and that's a challenging thing to do.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so should we have our final thoughts and close? Yeah, we're on the
Mhm.
past 10
Mhm.
minute mark. Okay, so final thoughts. Who wants to start? Mash?
Hmm. Okay, I can start. Um, Sorry, I'm getting a bit of an echo,
Yeah.
but so my final thought is that it's, as I said at the very beginning, it's astonishing how late in my career I kind of started thinking how important team agreements are. So if you haven't heard of it, if you haven't done it, if your team doesn't have these explicit team agreements, I think first thing to do is get those in. XP practices, principles, values are a good place to start. Craftsmanship and so on has also provides a good mindset around these things and helps you inform this stuff. And there are many other things as well. Create a baseline and get started uh, sooner rather than later. That's my final thought, I'd say.
Similar along the same lines. So I believe that anyone could trigger that, unless that you are in a very unhealthy environment. I believe that most environments that we see, for example, if you feel that something is not working so well, my advice would be don't just come in criticizing the current ways of working or practices or stuff. Try to say, look, I feel that there are certain things that could be better. I would like to understand what are we trying to achieve here. So if you start creating a higher baseline, moving towards values, principles are probably more concrete, let's say. Uh, so if you start in there, you will end up putting people on the same side, right? If you go to a practice and criticize the practice directly, you create a conflict straight away. But if you try to baseline 1 degree above, that is in the principle, say, look, do we value, like just to confirm here, do we value a quick feedback loop, as Mesh described earlier on? Is it what we're trying to achieve with those set of practices? Just trying to make sure that I understand. Great. So if we agreed in there, then you can say, look, I have a different proposal to achieve the same thing that might solve some of the problems that I see. So you start the discussion in a far more constructive way because you are not just creating a conflict between two things. You are now moving the discussion, first of all, creating that agreement at the top, making sure that everyone, before you even start proposing things, are trying to achieve the same thing. You have the same understanding, you have the same common goal. And then we say, look, given what we are doing on the ground and what we would like to adhere to in terms of principles and values, I feel that maybe we could explore these other ways of doing things because I see some inefficiencies in the way that we are doing XYZ. I think that this is a much healthier way of trying to drive those things and having those conversations would be easier if you do this way, regardless of how new, how old, how experienced or not you are in the organization.
I second all the stuff that was mentioned before. I would just say that try to hold yourself and others accountable to whatever agreements you decide. And if you need to change them because they're no longer valid or whatever, do that. But that is better than just having some web paper. You know what I mean? It doesn't really help you at all. Just doing the dance, no, just cargo culting in a way, right? So that's a skill. Yeah, it's not. Sometimes it's difficult to have certain conversations. If you want to know more about that, we have an episode on difficult conversations as well. So if you want to check it out, but it's something that you get more used to do if you practice it. So start practicing it, and I think you become, if you are already great, but if not, this will be something that your team will definitely value. No, it will make them better. So that's a skill to build. And this is all for today. Yeah, if this is the first time that you're here, remember to subscribe, hit the notification button. If you like the topic or whatever, share it on social networks, that kind of stuff. Get the word out. We thank you all for the participation. It's really cool to see that this is a topic that people are interested in, and you have really good questions as well that helps us explore the topic even further beyond what we initially thought even. So keep contributing, and see you again next Tuesday.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.